Is power something that you have to be born with? Or can you develop power through technique? And it's a little bit of a trick question. It's a little bit of a trick question in this way. If you're talking about power that could hurt somebody, yes, you can develop and you can learn technique. You could even learn range. Your speed and your timing is going to get a little bit better. Your setups are going to get a little bit better, so you can have a little bit better opening. And yeah, that's a very real thing, for sure. Now you're learning how to fight, for sure, very real thing. But my interpretation when I hear the word power is what you're talking about is somebody that can go out there and touch you one time and put you down. Yeah, he's born with that. 100% absolutely, that's something that you're born with. Some people are even born with just what we call good eyes. They just know range. They know right where that opponent needs to be for them to throw the punch to get the most out of it. I mean, it's a very real thing. But that isn't to say that you can't develop harder shots. You most certainly can. I'll give you an example. When I very first started, and this again, I was a fan, I was a teenager, and I was watching it on TV, and then I go get a heavy bag and work out on it, and envision my time when I finally got to go compete in this sport. And I never wrapped my hands once, ever. Never put gloves on or anything. Didn't own hand wraps. Didn't bother to put the gloves on. And I used to always think when I was doing that, I watched these boxers on TV, I watched these countdown shows and old Mike Tyson and Sugar Ray Leonard clips, and they always had their hands all wrapped up. And it took 20 minutes and someone had to wrap their hands. I remember thinking to myself, I must be tougher than those guys. I must be tougher than those guys because I don't need to wrap my hands. So then as I started to learn how to fight, I started to get practices in and work with coaches and actually learn the techniques and the turning of the hips and the rolling of the shoulders. And I started to learn this. Oh my goodness, I could not even imagine hitting a bag without wrapping, not only putting a glove on, but wrapping my hand also. A glove wouldn't be enough. I have to wrap my hand and put a glove on. It hurt my hand so bad. Point being, I was starting to hit harder. When I first started and I was hitting the bag and I didn't need wraps or anything, that's because I didn't know what I was doing and I was barely touching the bag. That's the reality. But I was so naive about my lack of knowledge and my lack of power that I didn't even know it. In fact, I thought I had convinced myself the opposite. So it is one of those things, and I only offer that story because it is evidence that once you start working on things, yes, your power can go up. As your technique and your timing, your precision goes up, you are going to be hitting that target much harder. I don't know if that equates to what we mean in a larger scope when we talk about power. When you're talking about those guys, Conor McGregor comes out, lands punches, breaks a guy's nose, cracks his orbital. I mean, it's just different. There's some guys that just have this kind of power. Dan Henderson, I used to train with Dan. Dan was one of those guys. You go watch Dan Henderson's career. If you didn't know about him prior and know about his youth, you may not even know that he was a two-time Olympic wrestler and a multiple-time national champion and all of these wonder things in wrestling because he was such a striker. He just liked it. He had a super tough chin, and he had that right hand that could just equalize anything. And he loved it, and he loved to set it up the same way, and he'd love to throw it the same way, but he was just one of these guys that had that power. He just did, and he didn't have it absolutely everywhere. He didn't have a kick that was going to, or this knee that was going to, he had one weapon and one hand, in terms of the power, that was so damn hard, it was like record knockouts, left and right. And we're all a bunch of wrestlers, and we're his teammates, and go, we don't have that skill. Where did he get that? But he just had that power in that one shot. As you start to learn that over time, as you start to learn what your strengths are, what you're good at, it's one of those things where you can steer into it. And Dan was one of the very few wrestlers who realized he had power and fell in love with his power, wanted to go out there and use his power, who had success over a period of time. Several other wrestlers would start to fall in love with that right hand and they would get away from their wrestling. Josh Koscheck was an extremely powerful guy and a great athlete. Johnny Hendricks would fall in that too. And those guys had power. But they fell so in love with it, and it was almost like this new skill and this new tool, and we wrestled our whole lives, and now we're going to go off and do this, and it was a part of it where then they kind of got a little way away from the wrestling. You said Josh Koscheck, Johnny Hendricks. Those guys weren't just good wrestlers. Those are two of the best wrestlers to ever enter mixed martial arts. And I tell you that because if you watched a lot of their fights, you didn't see a whole lot of that wrestling. It was one of these very risky things where you want to see a guy and you're happy that he's learning new things and you're happy that he's got this new toy to play with, but you do want to remind him, this is who you are. Turns out you've also got this, but use them together. Don't eliminate one and only use the other. But in my final analysis, I will tell you that yes, you can develop and learn through practice and training and proper technique to hit harder. But hitting harder and having power, you're born with.